Thank you very much indeed. So it's really the road from single incision surgery to no-hole surgery. And HIFU goes back many years, in fact to 1927, where a chap called Wood looked at the biological effects of high-frequency sound waves and aptly named William Fry, the Fry brothers, started producing lesions in the brain of cats and monkeys. In those days they had to do it by opening the skull, whereas in fact nowadays there are ways of getting into the skull with HIFU beam without opening the skull. But this was the size of the machines that they were using, and they were doing this just when the drugs for Parkinson's were coming along, so that died a death. But it started being used suggested for cancer treatment, and in 1997 the first patient was treated with extracorporeal HIFU in China. If you look at this high-impact journal, you'll find that the use of sound waves for destroying things isn't new, and as you know, that diagnostic ultrasound, we're interested in the scatter and the image that comes back rather than what happens at the focal point. But even with diagnostic ultrasound, there is a very, very small rise in temperature at the focal point due to absorption. And HIFU can really be thought of like light, like we all did when we were younger, putting a lens either on the back of our hands or on a spider and creating a focal point and then burning, causing a burn or starting a fire. And light obviously does it through air, but HIFU goes through fluid. And if you take the power up from the diagnostic ultrasound of 0.02 of a watt through the therapeutic effect as physios use to 200 watts, in other words 10,000 times the imaging energy, you can cause a burn at the focal point. And unlike hypothermia, if HIFU comes up to about 80 degrees centigrade virtually instantaneously and will cause cell death. Every time you fire this beam, you get a little lesion the size of a grain of rice. And it works through two mechanisms. Firstly, it's the heat, but the second one is cavitation. And cavitation is basically you get the compression and rarefaction which draws gas out of solution, forming bubbles which change in size. And it's a little bit like if you take the top off a champagne bottle, the gas comes out of, the bubbles come out of solution and cause this cavitational effect. And you have stable and unstable cavitation as the ultrasound wave changes, so the bubbles either with higher pressure they're smaller or lower pressure they're larger, and if they just alternate like that, that's stable. But if the bubbles collapse, then that's unstable cavitation, and you get a huge energy change in the microenvironment. And if that bubble collapses like this firework, if it's in open space, then the energy spreads outwards in all directions. But if it's against a hard surface, and this is a propeller underwater, and this damage is not caused by rust, this is cavitational damage, because if the bubble collapses next to a hard surface, you get a pressure just like a bullet, causing that sort of damage. And this is what happens within the cells itself. You can use HIFU for various things, and we had a operational officer at the John Radcliffe Hospital some years ago, and I asked him if he'd ever heard of cavitation. He said, yes, I used to work in the Ministry of Defence, and it was how we used to track the Soviet submarines, because the propellers gave off a certain cavitational profile, and you could tell whether they had 3 or 4 propellers and what type of submarine they were. Interestingly, HIFU can also be used to punch holes in cells to let genes in, and another use that we're looking at as well is that you can put you can put drugs into liposomes, inject them into the body, put a HIFU beam over, for example, the liver, break the liposomes over and open, so you get targeted drug delivery. But in that microenvironment, you can get just energy deposited which has temperatures high as the surface of the sun or pressures that are deeper than the ocean. They had this exhibition in London a couple of years ago looking at the power of sound. In China, they've treated about 30,000 patients, mainly people with osteosarcomas and liver tumours, very few renal tumours, but it's been used for these other things. And the brain tumours, as I said, there's a group in Toronto who have now been able, using time reversal technology, to put a HIFU beam into the skull through the bone, and it's totally altered and unusable. But if you then bounce it off and outside the skull, you can look at the alteration of the wave, and by using phased array transducers around the head, you can put an altered beam into the skull so that once it's in the skull, you can actually start ablating renal tumours. And there's a group, as I say, in Toronto and Zurich that have been looking at that. So this is the research establishment in Chongqing in China that we have links with, our new cancer centre in the Churchill. This was a machine that we had from China, and this is the one that we've got now. This one, although it looks like a CT scanner, actually the important bit is just this area here, and this has just got a big chain in it which actually allows this to move in different directions. So that's the important part of it, just there. And this is, if you look down on the top of that downwards, this is what you see. And we have a diagnostic transducer so we can actually see what we're doing, and this is the treatment transducer. There is another system, an Israeli system, Incitec, which is MRI guided, but this is ultrasound guided, so you can virtually see what's happening in real time. And basically, as I say, this is a demonstration of a liver. You just get these little grains of rice. That's the middle of a block of ox's liver. Very sharp demarcation between live and dead tissue, about 6 cells thick. That's the middle of a block of ox's liver, showing how precise you can be with it. And every time you fire it, you get one of these little lesions. And basically, just by arraying the lesions side by side, you just build up a 2D and 3D ablation of it, such as demonstrated there with liver tumour. And this is a phantom that China gave us, so that you can see this little white area there is what you get every time you fire the machine. And that's quite a nice thing, because that just fades after a while and then you can do it again. So we looked some time ago at the safety and toxicity and the performance of these for liver and kidneys. If we concentrate on the kidneys, I'll just say that it works a lot better for the liver tumours that are suitable. We had about 90% ablation. But this is what we did early on with the kidneys, treating the suitable ones with HIFU and resecting them, or just monitoring them with radiology. Some criticisms of that trial, in as much as we didn't biopsy them first, so we were just going on the MRI. And very little in the way of side effects, a little bit of discomfort. These are done under general anaesthetic, but they all went home the next day. They could have gone home the same day. The main problem that we see is a little, sometimes skin toxicity. You get a little bit of blistering on the skin, and we have had one more serious burn on the skin due to technical problems. It will make a hole in bowel if bowel's in the way, so it's important that bowel is out of the way. But a few other problems, and this is an example of some of the blistering that you get, because you can get these prefocal peaks as it goes through different tissue. This was one with a small renal tumour with uptake there, which disappears after 12 days, 6 months, a year, and in fact 5 years later. This was one of the early ones. There's still no uptake there. But what we've done recently is a new study looking at tumours less than 4 centimetres, biopsying them first, then HIFU, and then doing a partial nephrectomy on them, and looking at histology. So there are quite a lot that aren't suitable for treatment due to position at the moment. We've treated 10. Here's one with a tumour there, and after treatment that disappears. We then resected that, and all of that was necrotic. The only viable bit was a little rim of viable tumour down at the bottom. And this was another patient which not quite so much as viable tumour there, although a lot of this is ablated. This is VHL, again with the central bit that we targeted virtually all destroyed. We didn't target the other tissues there. So we've treated 10 out of the 36 screened, as I say, so that's quite a lot not suitable for treatment. And that's mainly because we can't see them when we put them on. If a lot of this depends on being able to see them with that diagnostic probe, which is not nearly as good as the ones in radiology. So, in fact, as that's got better, our treatment's got better as well. And we have had significant evidence of ablation in half of them. And here, one of the problems is the ribs get in the way and the perinephric fat gets in the way. This, interestingly, was a tumour in a renal transplant that we treated with HIFU. And I did end up doing a partial nephrectomy on him as well, because post-biopsy did show that there was a bit of active tumour, but in fact 90% of that had been destroyed. So we do have problems with it in terms of the ribs, the perinephric fat, and the time taken, which is often a couple of hours under general anaesthetic for a 4-centimetre tumour. But the technology is going to get better. And one thing that I think I would like to think about doing now is taking the VHL patients, which I monitor up to about 2.5 centimetres. We did actually write up one in the Journal of Urology some years ago who had metastatic disease from a 2.9 centimetre tumour. So I, like most other people, watch them till they get to 2.5 centimetres and then do a partial nephrectomy on them. I think we could try treating some of these with HIFU at 2 centimetres, and if they didn't change in size, then just leave them alone. And a big team who've been involved in this, and acknowledgements to them. Thanks.